They killed it for sport, the black snake coiled by the river, skin like liquid night. They roasted it. They laughed. They ate. Then, one by one, they started dying in ways that made the elders lock their doors at sunset. 3 down. 1 left. But Emeka never touched the meat. He couldn't. Killing had always turned his stomach. Now something is hunting him. Something that wears a woman's face and keeps appearing wherever he goes. She's tried twice to end him. Both times she couldn't. And the closer she gets, the more she sees. This boy's hands are clean. But the river has already spoken, and her people are watching. Tonight, she comes to him one last time, and mercy might cost them both everything. They left campus late, when the library lights blinked like tired stars and the buses had thinned to a few last damp ghosts. The 4 of them walked through a part of town that remembered the old river, where paths still made way for herds and the air stung faintly of clay and smoke. Emeka lagged behind, sleeves pulled over his hands like a child against cold. He had never liked hunting the way some of the others did. He did not like the way killing stripped a man to a small, raw edge. Kabir and Jide moved ahead with the easy swagger of boys who had learned to perform courage for the world. Kemi kept pace with Jide, laughing at something he said so the sound would be a string for the others to hold on to. They meant to go to the spring past the yam farms, to the shallow pool that professors liked to call a study spot when the river was low and the mosquitoes were polite. They meant to drink and argue over politics, to say things with bravado in the manner of men who had learned their morals in lecture halls and at late-night parties. They did not mean to find what they found. A black coil half in the water, the head resting on a stone as if keeping watch while the rest of the body slept. It looked too large for the pool, like a meal for a different season. It was not the slow, evasive brown of the common pythons that slipped through the reed. The skin drank light and returned none. It glowed like a patch of night stitched to the ground. Jide stepped first, the weed cracker's grin stuck on his face. "Proof," he said. "Proof of the bush." Kabir came closer, fingers restless. "Go on, Jide. Touch it." Jide set his boot on the coil like planting a flag. The skin shivered with the small, patient movement of a thing that keeps its calm. Then, with the single, sudden intent of the inexperienced, Jide reached down. The animal moved with a speed that was wrong for something so big. For a while it seemed the world held its breath as hand met scale. Kabir laughed a short, sharp laugh. Emeka said nothing. He had told himself that he would walk away. He had set his tea in his bag and had hung back from the way men did things together. Kemi, who never liked being told no, stepped close and her shadow fell on the black sheen. They killed it quick. There was a small, stupid ceremony of hands and voices, an irreverent song, and the big coil lay still. They wrestled it onto a carry pole and marched back toward the lodgings as if they had won something the world had denied them. At the yard behind their row of houses they cut the creature open on a slab and set it over coals. The meat browned and sputtered, fat popping. Laughter wrapped the night. Emeka carried his portion off a plate and left it untouched beside the drain. He cleaned his hands, fingers damp with the smell of smoke and burning, and then he went to his room with the taste of char curling in his throat like a bitter memory. There was a name for such snakes in the old stories, names his grandmother used to mumble when the kettle hissed, names that started with mother and ended in a warning. The old women in the market would press small cola into a palm and say things into the dust. Nobody told the boys the story now. The university taught them to join facts in tidy rows. Denial belongs to the living. The next week the market found Jide with eyes like 2 drowned things and a small, neat gap where a mouth might have been. The trader who discovered him said the boy had staggered like one drunk on rain, spoken nonsense, then simply stopped. They buried him quietly, as the town had always buried the ones the river's tongue scolded. Fast and with more silence than ceremony. Kabir was found in the yam fields 3 nights later, his body tangled in the roots, as if someone had pressed him into the soil to hold him quiet. Kemi went on an errand and did not return. They later found her near the river, her fingers still wet with mud, eyes not quite the color of anything living. The town did not call them coincidence. The old men who still wore the thick-beaded string of the river priest talked in sidelong sentences and told how the black skin of certain snakes was a boundary between men and the other things that kept the land. When the boys bragged and ate, they had not merely touched meat. They had broken a boundary. The river, which kept accounts people had forgotten to honor, had remembered. Emeka washed 3 sets of plates, scrubbing them until the sound of the water was a small ritual. He went about his days like a man who had not been chosen by the river's memory, who had been spared by the simple fact of abstaining. He told himself that luck had nothing to do with kindness. He told himself many things. At night the shadows in his room felt too close. He half expected to find a scale on his chair, a reminder. Once, in the shallow sleep of the second week, he woke because the window had been pushed open and something cold had slipped through. A scent like mud and old prayer. He left his bed and found in the small lamp light a dark pinprick on the veranda step, a slit of scale no longer than his thumb. He did not speak of it. The thing that came for them did not come at once. The hunter's law is a slow thing. It sees with the patience of long snakes. It does not leap for the first trespass. It builds a case in its quiet way. It studied these boys first, tasting the laughter that had crunched in their throats as the meat sizzled. Then it chose who would be its blade. The one men whispered about over fish heads and market chairs. The one whose name alone bent conversation into uneasy cadence. They called her no gentle names. Names that made mouths clench. She was the one the river saved for occasions that required something colder than rage. She was not a thing you would expect to walk in the market and order sugar. She moved like a hand that knows the exact pressure of a touch. When she smiled, it was an arrangement of teeth that seemed measured for something else. But she could look like most things a man might meet at the well. A woman with a coat under her arm, ankle boots that held wet earth, and austerity in the tilt of her head. If she had a name, the town did not speak it aloud. They only said, with a small gulp and the exchange of a coin, that she was someone who had come from the bush and who had eyes like the inside of a cave. She found Jide the way a storm finds the weakest branches. Quietly, by the road where the moon was thin, Kemi passed near the baobab and something took the sound from her voice. Kabir's end came with the slow cruelty of a man held by another man's memory. Each death was a sentence that fit the act. Nothing of their bodies remained like the things of a crime scene. The town wrapped them and put them in the ground and told each other stories in low voices. There were talks of offerings now, muttered rituals at midnight, the thickening of incense smoke in places it had not been, and still the boys had been taken. For weeks after the deaths, the river sang under its breath. People went to their shops and made small punches at daily routine. Students swapped the tragedy for jokes at the edge of lectures. And the woman, the hunter, kept appearing near Emeka. She was a shape that sometimes leaned against the stall where he sold boiled herbs to exam-tired tenants, or she would be the silhouette that passed his room in the compound late at night, carrying a small parcel of something that smelled of roots. She tried once. The first time it was quick and precise, an intent that startled him because it was so final. He had been asleep on his veranda mat, the night colder than usual, and when he woke she was there, crouched as if she had been watching him all night. She put her hand on his shoulder, and in that contact there was a pressure that felt like an unfinished ritual. He sat up before he understood the motion. Her fingers brushed his throat in a way that might have been to check for breath. She leaned in as if to whisper something, and the air tightened like the first few drops of a held storm. Then he spoke, voice thick with sleep and concern. "Are you okay?" The question landed between them like a stone in still water. She froze, eyes flicking to his face. No one had asked her that in longer than she could count. She drew back, confusion rippling across her features. She left without a word, melting into the dark as if she had never been there at all. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting episodes. The second attempt came in the market when laughter had soaked the evening and people bought tomatoes with the clink of coin. He had stood under a lamplight, shelving small bundles of lemon grass, when she appeared with a limp that had not been there before. She carried a shawl, and when she sat on the stool opposite the stall she did something ordinary. She smiled. It was a small thing and it made Emeka dizzy because it felt abruptly and horribly, like kindness. She reached for his arm, fingers closing around his wrist with intent. Her nails pressed into his skin, not quite breaking it but close. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face, and instead of pulling away he said, "You're hurt. Your leg, I saw you limping. Did something happen?" Again the question derailed her. The concern in his voice was genuine, unforced. Her grip loosened. She flinched as though she had been shocked, swallowed a sound that could have been anger or shame, then stood and left. Everyone watching would later say that he had been lucky. Only Emeka, instead of feeling triumphant, felt a worry that settled thick and green in his head. After that they kept finding each other in places where he least expected her. On the path to the water pump, under the tamarind tree where the younger students tried to keep their romances secret, once in the dark doorway of the lecture hall after a late seminar. Each time she was there his chest made room for a breath he had not expected to take. Each time he found himself speaking to her, small things at first, how the night was cold, how the market had been loud that day, how his aunt had raised him. She would listen without comment, sometimes raising a brow, sometimes letting the silence carry what needed to be said. And slowly, through fragments of conversation, she began to piece together the shape of him. That he did not eat meat because it made him sick to think of killing. That he had never hunted, never could. That the night they killed the snake, he had walked away and left his portion untouched by the drain. The realization came to her quietly, like dawn. This boy's hands were clean. He had not laughed over the coals. He had not torn flesh from bone. He had been there, yes, but only as a shadow on the periphery of guilt. She watched him with new eyes after that, something shifting in her chest that she could not name. It was not that she loved him. She was as distant as the river at noon, smooth and sure. But there was something in the way he treated her, with gentleness, with questions instead of demands, that made her hesitate when instinct told her to strike. She would close a hand as if she were about to act, and then she would instead fold her fingers into a fist and let the motion die. Once, with her head bent, she traced the outline of a scar on his forearm, the faint white line where a childhood fall had once split his skin. The touch was accidental but intimate. It left Emeka feeling as if a coin had slipped from his pocket unnoticed. She left him with a small, impossible gift, a tiny shell tied to a thread. He hung it by his window and no light ever struck it the same way again. They spent nights in which she came and left and returned, not with malice but with a tangible, painful indecision in her chest. She would sometimes sit for hours on the stair and hum a tune he had never heard, something long and low that made the leaves outside the compound tremble. He found himself answering that hum with his own small noises, and some nights they would talk about things that were not the deaths. She asked once, with surprising softness, how he could bear to go on eating bread in a world that needed meat. He shrugged and told her that he had always felt a kinship to things that need not be killed to live. She listened in that patient way people do when they know they are hearing something that will matter later. There was a night she came to him injured. She had a small wound at her shoulder, a half-moon of broken skin, and he found her cradling it as if the hurt might be fixed by attention. He cleaned her with water and a cloth, his hands steadier than his heart wanted to be. When he wrapped the bandage, she let him. Their fingers brushed and something in him tightened like a net. But there was always a shadow that passed across her face afterward, as if a responsibility had sat on her and refused to rise. Whatever tenderness had made itself visible retreated at the sound of it. Her jaw worked and she swallowed and she left without finishing the sentence that had begun. The town grew angrier. The elders said their names more often now, in the way people say prayers. There were nights of whispered counsel and offers at the river. The priest who served the small shrine tightened his cords, rubbed at the beads, and spoke of balance. The people wanted to be confident that the market could go on unthreatened. They wanted the river to give and not to take. They wanted the story contained. That she lingered with Emeka while men mourned looked to many like mercy. And when you see mercy where the world asks for justice, fear grows like fungus. And so it was arranged. The men came to her one evening, not in a crowd but in a string of faces like coins. They stood on the edge of the square and spoke in phrases that had become ritual. The law, no leniency. Message to be sent, the balance restored. They did not shout. The strength of their demand was the way they refused to look away. She listened with her head down. At the end of the talk, one of them stepped forward and placed his palm on her shoulder in a gesture that was part blessing and part claim. He did not say the words, but she heard them from the way his hand removed itself. Do it. She walked to him that night knowing the river's voice was now a chorus. She had no pretense of injury. She wore the same coat she had worn when she first came near the lodgings, and it carried the faint scent of mud and reed. People who saw her pass called it a hard night, but she went on. Emeka had been waiting in the small yard, the lamp on the wall making a small halo of light. He stood as she approached, not moving. There was no one else there. The compound had emptied at the sound of the town's decision. He met her in the space where the light met shadow. She stopped a few feet away and looked at him the way people look at rare birds. There was a softness to the look that made Emeka's chest burn. He had that foolish, human hope that the world might spare him for reasons beyond law and ledger. You came, he said, like a man discovering a promised gift. She said nothing. For an instant the night hung between them like a sheet of glass. Her mouth set in a small hard line. She moved closer and he could see now that her jaw had a tension he had not noticed before, as if she were carrying within a sound that had to be swallowed. He could have run. He could have thrown himself at the fence and begged and crawled to the river and prayed. But he had never been a man of flight in the face of things that needed facing. He had always been the quiet hand that waited to see what a burden wanted to be. He opened his arms instead and did something no one would have told him to do. He did not kneel. He stood and let her see his face fully. You don't have to, he said. She came then and they fell into each other like two tired branches. The embrace was not soft. It was not the thing that comes at the end of love stories. It was a hold that asked for breath and gave none back. He placed his cheek against the shoulder she had wounded and felt the rapid, strange beating under her skin that comes when a person is trying to be two things at once, merciful and obedient. Her hands rested on his back, and he felt them tremble. He could smell her proper, a wet, smoky scent of the bush and bread. He wanted to comfort her with the foolish tenderness of a man who had been spared by his own choices and who wanted to give back the world in small kindnesses. He kept his voice low so as not to break the stillness. Then don't, he whispered, the single syllable heavy with hope and terror. Then don't let them take it from you. She pressed her face into the hollow of his neck. He could feel the fine hairs there stand up. For a moment everything in her bent toward the human possibility of staying. She softened, and in that softening Emeka saw his life open like a small door. He thought then that perhaps what the elders had feared, an outside thing reclaiming what was sacred, might not be an inevitable arithmetic. Maybe law sometimes had room for mercy. Maybe human choices could avert ledger and debt. He tasted foolishness and joy both at once. Her grip tightened, suddenly and without warning. He started. Then she eased, but the motion had the ring of nerves too long held. She drew back, eyes dark, and he saw the rawness on her face. She shook as if a cold had moved through her. She lifted her head and looked at him as if to memorize him. If I don't finish this, she began, her voice a small, breaking thing. He looked at her, and for the first time she let herself be clearly vulnerable in front of him. Then they will, she finished. He understood then everything his presence meant and did not mean. He understood the smallness of his immunity and the enormity of the debt he lived under by virtue of being spared. He could, in this moment, reach for 1,000 excuses, call for help, make a run. But he had learned something in the way his grandmother had taught him to prepare dishes and to fold cloth. Some things do not unmake by running. He had become, in a way he had not chosen, a threshold. She did not move away. She held him there as if the embrace itself might be the thing that would keep the world from answering. The night leaned on them and some distant rooster gave the small dry laugh of a market waking. They were alone in a pocket of dark and light, skin to skin, breath mingling. He pressed his hand over hers against his back and held her as if the embrace might be a shelter for both of them. She tolerated the contact, though the tremor in her palm did not leave. For a moment the world seemed to hold a different possibility. Perhaps standing together they could change the ledger, could speak for a different kind of balance. Then, as simply as clouds close over the moon, the small thing that had softened her hardened. She straightened and drew a little away to look at him full. There was no more said. The two of them stood in the thin light, and the hush that followed felt like the instant before a great drum strikes. The town had made its choice and the river had made its counting. She had been commanded and she had come. Whether she would obey the exact letter of that command or bend by the weight of her heart, Emeka could not know. He could only hold the small, human thing he offered and wait. The moment stretched, long and thin, and Emeka thought with a child's clarity about the taste of cassava his aunt used to boil for him, about the slow kindness of hands that fold clothes and fold men into something safer. He thought of his friends and of how raw their deaths had felt like the slash of a blade on the air. He thought of mercy as a possible rebellion. She moved then, but not away. She moved inward so close he could feel the fine hairs on her face brush his cheek. Her mouth was near his ear. She breathed words that were almost not words, perhaps a whisper of apology or perhaps a confession he was not meant to hear. The sheltering light of the lamp made her lashes long and dark, and something in him almost broke. Almost. For a reason that had nothing to do with law or ledger. It was a soft thing, private and foolish and ravaging. And then she said it again, steady and small. If I don't finish this, they will. She did not pull away. She did not promise mercy. She did not promise cruelty. She only allowed the statement to hang between them like a verdict. The air that followed was so thick he could have reached out and taken it in handfuls. He thought of the ways the river keeps accounts, of how the market stacks small sins and then counts them with an indifferent hand. He thought of how every choice draws lines in sand that later become walls. He held her, and in holding her he felt more alone than he ever had been. The hug had become a decision. The night waited, patient and terrible. She could have spoken then, could have said she would disobey and run. She could have hung the world on one act of rebellion. She instead tightened her arms and let the limbs of the hug become the last place of choice. Her breath came quick for a heartbeat and he felt it on his neck like a small warning. There was no answer from the dark. There was only the faint sound of a palm board in a far-off house beating out a rhythm for the market. The compound doors were shut. The town slept or pretended to sleep. The river hummed her old songs somewhere beyond the plots of cassava. The whole of the world narrowed to the two of them under the lamp. Then she released him, slowly and without drama, and stepped back. She wiped her hand on the side of her coat as if to remove the smell of him, though he knew that smell would not wash away so easily. She looked at him once more, long and steady, a look that tried to memorize the shape of his shoulders and the line of his jaw, the ordinary human things that would remain whether she obeyed or refused. He reached for her hand and she took it, for a moment, just a moment, and held it to her chest like a talisman. Her fingers were cool and the skin of the palm was rough from long walks in bush and market. The contact was small, but it felt like a sacrament, both blessing and last rite. She turned then and walked toward the shadows at the edge of the yard. But she didn't disappear into them. She stopped, her back still to him, silhouette dark against darker night. Emeka's breath caught in his throat. "Come with me," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. He didn't move, couldn't move. "What?" She turned her head just enough that he could see the profile of her face in the lamplight. "The elders are watching. If you stay here alone, if I leave you alive and walk away." She paused, and when she spoke again her voice was hollow. "They'll know I failed, and they'll send others who won't hesitate." His heart hammered against his ribs. "Where?" "The river." She took a step back toward him, and in the lamplight he saw something in her eyes he couldn't name. Not quite mercy, not quite hunger. "There's a way, an old way, but you have to trust me." "Trust you?" The words came out broken. "I'm not asking you to understand." Her hand extended toward him, palm up, fingers trembling. "I'm telling you that if you stay here, you die tonight. If you come with me." She trailed off, and for a heartbeat something almost human flickered across her face. "If you come with me, maybe neither of us has to." The lamp behind him sputtered. Wind moved through the compound, carrying the scent of wet earth and something older. Something that made his skin prickle with instinctive dread. In the distance he heard voices. Low murmurs from the direction of the market. The elders, perhaps. Or worse, others like her coming to see if the job was done. Her hand remained extended. Waiting. Emeka. His name on her lips sounded like a prayer and a threat all at once. Now. He looked at her hand. At the darkness behind her. At the lamp that was dying, leaving him in shadow. He thought of his friends in the ground. He thought of the black snake coiled by the water. He thought of all the small kindnesses he'd offered her, and how each one had stayed her hand. The voices grew closer. He took a step forward. Then another. Her fingers closed around his wrist. Not gentle, not cruel, just certain. Her skin was cold. Her grip was iron. "Don't look back," she whispered. And then she pulled him into the dark. The lamp went out. In the morning, the yard would be empty. The elders would find no body, no blood, no sign of struggle, just an overturned cup of tea and a small shell on a thread, swaying in the breeze by an open window. Some would say she had finished the job and taken him to the river, to join his friends in the ground. Others would whisper that she had taken him somewhere else, somewhere the old laws still held, where debts could be paid in ways the living didn't understand. But no one would know for certain, and no one would ever see Emeka again. Thanks for staying till the end. Kindly like, share, and subscribe to get more interesting stories.